Well, my name is Adam Nordell, and my partner Johanna and our baby Caleb are, I guess they're taking a little walk outside, so they might come up and join me later, or maybe not, but they're here. I'm from Montana, and got to Maine by a College of the Atlantic. Really excited that some of the COA communities here today. Todd Little-Siebold was my professor there, and Suzanne Morse, also another of my professors. And what do I want to say? Sing a little song.
A little louder, please.
Sure.
You could come closer. There are chairs up here.
This is Michael Klein's banjo. Yeah, so a few threads that run through here. All right, I'm not very good at learning songs, so I write them. I've been working in the hot sun, the weeds are getting high, swinging that hoe like the pendulum goes, beating out 4/4 time I find right about and parched as a well gone dry. Hear the water running over those stones, and I leave the weeds behind. Down in the sweet land, on the bank of the sandy river, cold swimming hole where the river takes a bend, makes you want to shout and you shiver. Hallelujah, can I get an amen? The bean blossom is swelling, rise up like corn when the soil gets warm on the bank of the sandy river. I go to the Grange Hall after work on Friday night. The carpenter's daughter likes to contra dance, we can spin around all right. Smile as wide as a melon rind, she's sweet as pumpkin pie. She's as wholesome as succotash, but friends, I tell you, late last night she took me down to the sweet land, the bank of the sandy river, cold swimming hole where the river takes a bend, makes you want to shout and you shiver. Hallelujah, can I get an amen? The bean blossom is swelling, with fingers entwined like a winter squash vine on the bank of the sandy river. You've heard the farms will go, nothing grows like a crop of houses. Songs get written like epitaphs for the fields that we'll see no more. But there's no time for that right now, the springtime is upon us. I got a box of seeds right here that my grandparents left behind. We'll take them down to the sweet land, on the bank of the sandy river, cold swimming hole where the river takes a bend, it makes you want to shout and you shiver. Hallelujah, can I get an amen? The bean blossom is swelling, rise up like corn when the soil gets warm on the bank of the sandy river. Rise up like corn when the soil gets warm on the bank of the sandy river. Should I be stoic?
You can play it with your feet if you like.
Steve,
Light it on fire. Behind his back first. Yeah.
All right. So, Johanna, my partner Johanna and I run Songbird Farm, as Albie mentioned, and we're mixed vegetable growers. We're like a lot of our young-ish farmer peers. We've been farming for 11 years now. First down in Pemaquid, near where Johanna grew up, and then not far away from here on J. Robinson's land in Starks, beautiful sandy loam interval land along the Sandy River. And then for the past 4 years in Unity, where we now own our own land together with the bank. And the year before we moved back to Montana, we met this guy in Montana, Dave Christensen, who's mildly well known in corn enthusiast circles. He developed a variety that a lot of people grow called Painted Mountain. And Dave has a slightly different perspective than a lot of us here. He's sort of trying to create heirlooms for the future, you might say. So he's making taking a lot of heritage varieties and breeding them together to create composite corn types with incredibly diverse genetics in the hopes that he sends them out, he sells the seed, but he's interested in seeing it grown all over the world, so that as the climate changes and our corn varieties need to adapt, there's an incredibly diverse gene pool coming from the original native varieties on which to draw, since none of us know what our future is going to look like. So we went to a conference. This is Johanna, Caleb. We met Dave Christensen and I was really inspired by his presentation on corn and why corn is beautiful and important. And the next year we moved back to Maine to start farming. And there were already at that point, and now in Maine there are a lot of young farmers, which is wonderful. A lot of land coming back into production and a lot of organic vegetables available through CSAs and farmers markets and the food co-ops. It's exploding, which is great. And it's tricky. We're winding up competing with each other for market access at this point to sell vegetables. A lot of people trying to do very similar things. So we thought, let's find something a little bit different to do. We don't just eat vegetables in our culture. What else can we grow that would be part of an interesting local food diet? We thought, let's grow corn and beans, like such good foods. And we didn't know of anybody then who was direct marketing cornmeal and dry beans.
And we could do it by hand. I think that was sort of the biggest. Like when we started the veggie farm, we were doing everything really low budget and just the two of us, mostly by hand. And other grains were interesting to us at that point, but like all needs special mechanized equipment if you're going to do it on a commercial scale. But corn especially is so easy just to do by hand and to do a lot of it that way. So
yeah, if you have hands and maybe a hoe, you can plant corn. That's cool. Maybe if you don't even have hands, you can plant with your feet, like you're describing, Steve. Yeah. So just for a little show and tell, since we didn't have to cross a international boundary to get here. This is. Caleb is holding a selection of Painted Mountain. Painted Mountain is usually a really beautifully multicolored corn. It's the flower corn. So like Steve was saying, this is a Western derived variety, a Western and Southwestern. So it's adapted to grow in dry climates. People grow it here in Maine, but it's you could argue that it's most at home growing in an arid climate, like Montana, where Dave does his corn breeding. So we've been playing with that. Dave has another variety in addition to Painted Mountain called Mountain Morado. That's the darkest blue-black corn I've ever seen. And he hasn't released that variety, but we're trying to copy his seed selection and get to something similar. So that's a selection of Dave's Painted Mountain. The first year we were back in Maine, farming in Pemaquid and also in Whitefield. We still have a piece of corn in Whitefield. We grew this Hopi corn. Beautiful, big stalks, big cobs and ears. We didn't really know what we were doing that first year. I suppose we still don't know what we're doing. But we were able to harvest some of our crop and ground some of it. And I heard a rumor that Albie Barden might be our corn archivist. I don't know if you still have some Hopi blue corn in your deep freezer.
A little bit.
That's pretty cool.
but it's a long season because it's from the Southwest and it prefers dry climate. And so growing it here was a push. And after planting it and seeing it grow so tall and just take a really long time, it was like, okay, this is great. It's really fun to grow corn, and people like are excited about it and excited about having local cornmeal. But wouldn't it be an idea to find a variety that actually has been grown here? Like there's an idea.
Yeah. So rather than the many generations of planting that it might take to get Hopi Blue to be truly adapted to grow in northern New England, let's look for a corn. People have been growing corn for a long time in northern New England, long since before it was northern New England. Let's find a corn that knows how to grow here and is at home growing here. So we leafed through the Fedco seed catalog and what corn varieties do they offer. And there was that's all right. There was a corn variety listed in the Fedco seed catalog called Abenaki Flint, Roy's Callus Flint. That sounded pretty interesting. Very short season corn, 90 days to maturity. Beautiful yellow and red. Hard flint corn type rather than the flower. Hopi Blue is a flower type. And flint corns, as I understand it, were selected by Native people here in the Northeast because they taste great and are beautiful, and also because they shed moisture. If we get a long rainy fall like we sometimes do in Maine, a flint corn seems to shed moisture without rotting a lot better than a flower corn or even a dent corn will. So you avoid some fungal diseases by growing a well locally adapted variety. So this is, pass them around. This is Roy's Callus Flint, Abenaki Flint, which Aaron can speak to a lot of the varietal history better than I can, but was sort of rediscovered or discovered by white people in northern Vermont, by Western Abenaki. It's coming from Western Abenaki people. And it's delicious. It makes amazing cornmeal. We have a stone mill on our farm, so we're grinding fresh and marketing directly to customers through a CSA. And that's been sort of the evolution of our farm. Rather than being farmers market vegetable vendors, we do sell some wholesale vegetables, but we've oriented ourselves more towards direct marketing grains. We grow some heritage varieties of wheat and rye. We do oats, and we're still doing the dry beans. And every year we sell CSA shares to home bakers who want interesting varieties, heritage, locally adapted varieties, stone ground and farm direct. And that's been a good niche for us. The cornmeal cells that we sell out every year, earlier and earlier, people really like this stuff. It tastes really good, and I think it has a local resonance. People have been eating corn here for a really long time, and whether you know any of that history or not, I didn't grow up here, and even if I had, I probably wouldn't have a wonderfully deep grasp of local history. But it just makes sense that there's something about it. Anadama bread, brown bread, Johnny cakes, all these old recipes. That, even in the white tradition, we eat a lot of cornmeal in New England. So let's explore that. Even though, on one hand, in our culture, corn is the most common, least interesting. It's like exemplifies the idea of a commodity crop more than anything else to me. It's the most profane, one of the first things to get genetically engineered. But on the other hand, it's this beautiful, pure, old thing. So that's really interesting to me, and I think worth digging into. It's been a little challenging to grow. I think the story of Roy's Callus, when it was rediscovered, there were a small number of ears found from a crop grown out long ago, and high mowing seeds took on the task of propagating it and growing it out. Jack Glazer was involved with that. Jack Glazer started selling seed to Fedco. We were lucky enough our first year buying 10 pounds of seed and growing it on Jay's land in Starks to inherit Jack Glazer's seed account for Fedco. Jack stopped growing Roy's Callus for Fedco that year. So as very novice, inexperienced seed growers, we were approached by Fedco to provide seed for them the next year. And Heron Breen, who's a great guy who's going to be speaking later, was our seed saving mentor for the first few years, helping us figure out what to select for and how to take care of the variety.
Corn was your mentor.
Well, also.
We just wrote you checks.
That
That's what I do best.
When you say it's these few cobs survived, just survived disuse, or was there some kind of event that did it?
Good question. My very limited understanding of that history of the corn is that somebody somehow a white farming family received it or acquired it somehow from the Western Abenaki people and grew it for a long time in Vermont, in Calais, Vermont, and then stopped growing it in favor of other varieties or because they stopped farming. I'm not sure what that history is, but they kept a few years. And everything we've been growing, we've grown as many as 4.5 acres of Roy's Callus. And people all over, people on the West Coast grow it. The seed is available at this point, and so there's a lot of it being grown around, but it all is descended from those few cobs, which is really beautiful and a neat resurrection story, I think. And it's not uncomplicated too. As people now, we're trying to incorporate this into the way that we're making a living as farmers. I can pass down a couple. This is what it looks like ground up. The cornmeal and some of our branding and marketing. We can see as farmers that there's a market for it. We're trying to meet some of the market demand and make a living. But it's hard to scale up. The corn was developed before, not in a mechanized agricultural context. It was developed by people who were planting and harvesting by hand in a community setting where there was a lot of labor available. And so to transition that into a Western farming system it's imperfect. Jack Glazer stopped growing Abenaki Flint or Roy's Callus Flint because he couldn't harvest it with a corn picker. The cobs are very skinny. They're almost the same. The ears are almost the same diameter as the stalk, which means on one hand you're getting less corn per plant, but on the other hand, in a wet climate, there's more surface area around each kernel, so they can dry out more easily than if you have on the Hopi corn coming from a dry climate. They don't have the dry down problem. This is like a 12 or 16 row corn. All these kernels packed around a fat cob. This you could harvest with a corn picker, but it's arid where it was developed, and the corn is going to dry down without too much of a problem. So a corn picker does its magic by funneling the plants. I don't know what any of the parts of a corn picker are called, but between two chains with teeth on them, and the stalks fit between the chains, but the ears of corn don't. They pop off and they ride up a little elevator into a husking bed. But if you try to use a corn picker with Roy's Callus, which we have, the ears get sucked right down between those chains and chopped up. We had a very, very grim attempt at harvesting it. We harvested a couple 100 feet, and 3 ears of corn landed in the wagon.
Yeah.
Where did all the corn go? We looked in the field, and there it was, all chopped up with the corn stalks. So what do you do? How do you, is this, what's the right context to grow a heritage variety that was adapted to grow in a community, non-mechanized context, and is maybe is suffering from inbreeding depression as well, and doesn't have the stock strength that another variety might. We're planting mechanically with an old Alzheimer's corn planter, and we harvest by hand. And we have a big party every fall and invite people to come eat cornbread and chili and help get the corn in. So the COA crew was there to help us harvest our corn last year, which was really, really wonderful. And that's the only way we can do it. But it is something to think about. Like as we choose heritage varieties over hybrid modern varieties developed for production systems, what is that going to look like? It's going to look different than a big production corn farm. That's probably good. But just being ready to be to adapt the way we expect things to happen, I think is smart. Yeah.
About 20 years ago, there was a corn project at Six Nations where they want to mechanize planting the corn, but they realized because they didn't have an extra collar in there, it wouldn't fall, so they had to harvest it manually. So it was determined, they came up with a figure of costing $90 a bushel. So from that time, that was a price that corn was marketed at, like amongst the native communities, at $90 a bushel on the white corn. And the second thing about corn, to answer your question, is that corn is companion of man. So it has to have hands-on. So whatever you try to do to change that doesn't work, you know. And that's what happened with them. They put it in. They tried to use a harvester, and it busted up all the corn. So they tried to change to breed it differently, and it didn't work. So you talk about more heritage and traditional varieties are made. It was developed to have hands-on, because that's part of the spirituality. That's part of its genetics. That's a part of how it grows. Corn is one of the only plants that needs intervention. You could put beans there and they'll take care of themselves. Squash will go back on its own depending where it's grown. But corn needs human intervention. So that's something to keep in mind. So what you're doing is beautiful.
Question?
Yeah.
Would it be possible to do a pick your own, all strawberries and woodberries and apples?
Possibly. Yeah.
You staggered your plate.
Yeah. If you had people who wanted Flint corn on the ear. Yeah.
If you had a grinding station available too.
Right.
Does it have to dry after it's picked?
It does for us. Yeah, where we grow it, and with our season, like we have a pretty short season at our farm, and we'll after we harvest, we've been shucking by hand, and we still do that at the party, which is really I have to say it's really fun harvesting with a big group of people, walking through the cornfields. Corn grows like right at about hand height. You reach out, it's like shaking somebody's hand. You break the ear of corn off. It's very ergonomic and friendly crop. And you're just like chatting with the person in the row next to you, and then we pile it in the barn, and there is still a lot of moisture in the kernels at that point, so it's important to get it shucked soon. So we have this big mountain of corn filling the center of the barn, and sit in a circle around the corn and shuck, take all the husk leaves off. 2 years ago, we didn't get it all done in the party, so we were shucking for 2 weeks straight. Listening to the election results roll in. And there's a lot of manual labor and really bad news. And we decided we have to mechanize this process. And so we imported a corn shucker from China which works really well, but it's incredibly loud. It runs off a tiny little diesel engine, and it shakes the barn and the house as it runs. So maybe we'll keep shucking by hand. So then we shuck it, then the air can get to it. We have really great grain growers book by Jack Glazer called The Organic Grain Grower, where he talks about Quebec style corn cribs, long, skinny, wire mesh corn cribs. And we sort of tried to duplicate his design for that, and we put the corn in that. It's about 3 feet wide by 10 feet long, 8 or 10 feet tall. 2 layers of hardware cloth so the birds don't treat it as a big bird feeder, because they do. It's only 1 layer. And it's amazing. Maine is wet, and it rains and it snows a ton here. And there's a roof on it, but the sides are open, so it does get a teeny bit wet when it rains, and it dries out. In the spring, it's significantly drier than when we put it in there in the fall. So the corn knows how to dry down here. Then we have an old hand crank corn sheller. We shell all of our corn on. We winnow it to get the cob chunks and the little silks, dried silks out. Early in the season, we'll still have to dry it down a little farther. So we have a forced air box with a big old salvaged furnace fan, plywood box with some hardware cloth suspended in the middle, so you can put 3 inches of corn piled up on the hardware cloth and push a bunch of air through it. And using that, we can have corn early enough to sell cornmeal at the Common Ground Fair, which is always a goal. Yeah.
I have just an observation. You're actually on a good process to speed up your harvest by having children. Back in the day,
Yeah.
right? This was kind of the economy. And Albie and I on our first date he had me harvest an acre of corn with him, of course.
That sounds romantic.
It does. It was actually in Parkman at. They're here. They're here. They're all well. Okay, now here's an example of how a farmer can avoid mechanization. Right there, they are. There's Chloe. Okay, so. The gang, we all harvested that acre of Byron. It was Byron, wasn't it?
No, Darwin John.
Darwin John, sorry. And there we were, sitting outside and just going at it. The kids were helping, and it was an amazing thing. So keep going.
It's similar to the way we harvest. We just put it in a big barn, and we have a group husking, and then we have a group braiding, because we braid all our corn, then we hang it.
Neat.
The braiding is beautiful.
We braid corn. We braid our corn.
Where do you hang it to dry?
You can hang it like right in here.
Uh-huh.
As long as the birds or squirrels don't get into it. It just needs air circulation, but we braid our corn. That's how we keep it. And then as we braid, we select the best ears that we have, and that becomes seed braid, like depending on how much corn we have, but we make seed braids, and the other braid is to use, and the ones that break, then they just throw them in a big basket and go for soup right away.
Steve, how do you recognize corn that's good for seed?
Well, first you begin by wiping your glasses. Where's mine? All right, here we are. So there's the characters in the corn is what you want. All right. So out of this is nice corn in itself. Okay. So for us, we're gonna pick. The most important is the size of the kernel. All right. And then the length of the cob, and then how wide the cob is. And then the other thing is your own personal choice. What you like, what looks good to you, what looks the finest of what you have. Then you decide that's going to be your seed, and then you put that on the side. In the end, you braid it. I could braid this, but see the way we braid, we need it's got to be wet the cob. But I'll just show you quickly. So even when you husk the corn, You have to keep 3 good husks, all right? You gotta get, this has got to be cut down, and then usually we kind of use a spray bottle to keep it moisten it up again. And then it gets folded over like that, two, and it starts, and then we put a corn, and then we come up, and as you come up, you add a corn, so that it the corn is on both sides, so the braid is like that.
In the center.
I would have. I almost brought a whole big braid, but then I didn't want to have any problem at the border. And then when I got the border, there was no problem, nothing at all. You said where you going, and that was it. So.
Well, if you brought the braid, you would have been stopped.
Yeah, that's how that works. See, so it flips over like this. You start, and then you have 3 good husks, and you flip it like that. So, anyways, in the end, it's kind of start like this. So then you come up here, then you put the third one, then you start, and as you come over, you add a cob, and then you come back and you add a cob. So as you're coming up, and then depending how long your braid is. So at the end of your braid, what you do is you keep the husk, and you add the husk with no corn on it, and keep on braiding until you get so long. Then you take that and you make a loop, and then you weave it back in, and so it has its own handle and hangs back up. I got some pictures we can look at later, show you. But that's the way we braid, and then I'll show you a picture of seed corn. And the ones I have here are there were 18-inch cobs. They dry down to 16 and 14 and that, But 16-inch cob, that's a good sized cob, The thing is, we braid in roughly 50 cobs per chain. But you need a young guy to hang that up there, because it weighs like 80 to 100 pounds one, and then in a good season put it 80 to 100 braids. So that's a lot of. So we make a big corn party, and we make corn soup. We make 2 kind of corn soups that we have. So talking about General Sullivan, when he burned our cornfields, the corn didn't just burn up, disappear, turn to ash. The corn was burnt. So our people still went out there and picked the corn and made corn soup with burnt corn. And so today that's it really tastes good. So that's so we make burnt corn. We burn our corn purposely today to make that corn soup, because it's a family tradition.
Yeah.
You see, and that's one that we serve. So with whitewash corn, or you can use the Flint corn, and like you're making hominy, that's what you're doing. So and then this bean and some kind of meat that you like. Could be deer, could be pork, In ancient days, like in the 1600s, I heard they cooked Jesuits in there. I don't know if they were tasty or not, but you converted. You were converted.
How many cobs does it take to produce a bag of the cornmeal like you were passing around?
No, what do you think, Johanna? Or Sean, do you have an idea?
I don't know.
Cubs, maybe 6? Maybe? Rough guess. More than that? Which right? This one, this is when we got, when Heron visited our farm to show us how to save seed and select for, to keep Abenaki Flint true to type. He pointed out that in the seed, you'll find occasional sweet corn kernels and occasional sort of these creamy white colored kernels mixed in only on the yellow ears. I should have said with that variety, this is sort of this is a representation of what we got for seed. About 1/3 red, 2/3 yellow. And it seems to, maybe its natural inclination is to maybe the red is a little bit dominant, but that's sort of what we've been selecting for. And never on the red kernels, only on the yellow, never on the red ears, but only on the yellow ears. Occasional white kernels will show up. On both color types, we'll see occasional sweet corn kernels on the ear. So those are ears with either of those traits are in our cornmeal selected pile. We don't want to sell those traits as seed, or keep it on as seed for use on the farm. But at some point, somebody, maybe it was you, Heron, maybe Frank Cook, I can't remember, some seed mentor suggested planting the white kernels and the sweet corn kernels, for that matter, too, to see what happens. What are you going to get? Maybe those are interesting genetics and not just genetic trash that's crept in. Yeah.
Just one quick question. With as many varieties as you have, how do you prevent cross-pollination? Do you have to hand pollinate everything, or do you just have enough area that you can keep everything separate?
We stagger our plantings. So we're planting this year. Hopefully, we'll plant 4 or 5 acres of Abenaki Flint. We're not going to do that by hand. We're not going to transplant it. But if we're doing a little seed selection project, we can start it early in our greenhouse. We have greenhouse space, and we'll plant in peat pots and then get those going a month or 2 weeks at least before we're planning on planting in the ground. And then it will tassel out and pollinate ahead of our main crop.
Okay.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, sure. I guess we're getting documented. Would you like to hold any corn?
All right. Can't get yourself to do it.
Adam, one thing I wanted to mention about what they're doing is that Adam and Johanna have also been able to maintain this corn free of GMO contamination.
This is white corn that we grew out of the bush.
Every crop that they've delivered to Fedco has been tested through what's called PCR testing, which is basically it can test basically down to 1/10,000, which is like, there's probably a way to get farther than that, but it costs thousands of dollars rather than hundreds of dollars. So one of the great things about this project that they've been stewarding is that they've been able to keep the GMO genetics from getting into this corn. That's a huge thing. And so literally every corn, every batch of seed that they bring is like tested every time. And that's a big deal for that. It's a big deal for them for that to then be achieved every year.
Adam, can you talk about how you do that? Do you have techniques that you're doing that intentionally, or is it just working out that way?
Knock on wood. It's working out that way. We're planting, I believe, far enough away and with the right prevailing winds and situated correctly with the prevailing winds that we're somewhat minimizing our risk. There is silage corn grown in our general area, as you know. Most of that, what are silage corn growers doing? They're trying to produce biomass. They're not necessarily trying to get dry kernels by the end of the season. So a lot of those corns seem to be longer season corns that grow really big. They often tassel, not always, but often tassel really late because they're not trying to get a finished ear. That works in our favor. So they're pollinating later than ours does. So we're trying to plant as soon as we can so that our corn has the best chance of tasseling. It naturally is going to tassel early because it's a short season corn. And then just being really careful about the seed. Do we see any strange looking kernels, any off types in there? And if we do, it's not seed quality. Thanks.
Worked with fossil corn pollen and looking in lake sediments for a big project was to try and find evidence of corn pollen in lake sediments that date back to pre-Columbian times. And corn pollen is very big, just like most other grass pollen, but it's like 3 times the size, and it's heavy. So it usually doesn't travel a huge long distance. I mean, that doesn't mean that a single few pollen grains couldn't travel a long distance. So, but I think distance would help between fields would help very much with maintaining cleanliness.
Yeah.
Could I interject something? I saw Jamie several times for some bodywork treatments, and he lives in Unity as well. And we anticipated the harvest at Songbird Farm, and he's part of the crew, that neighbors and friends that go to harvest the corn. And maybe it sounds like I'm preaching, which I am, but I want it to be really, really clear that corn is teaching us how to grow it and how to handle it. And it's insisting that we be a community, or corn doesn't do well. So what they create in their gathering of the corn is corn as the teacher and the spirit and the mother is giving an opportunity for us to experience community. We're in this barn versus a big hall in a small space with a small group of people, so we can experience community. And I see it as less a problem of how we're supposed to grow it. Rather, it's more a challenge of telling us how we're supposed to grow it and how we're supposed to harvest it. Because this is what we as a country have forgotten, how to be a community on the land. And in the long term, as we face the next 20 to 50 years, a lot of us will have to remember how to be communities on the land, or we won't make it. And so what Adam and Johanna are doing, and what Sean and Sandra and their children are doing, is it's not some oddball freak thing that we shouldn't look to as an example. It is the way. Corn, more than any other grain, you can start in a bucket. I have given away countless kernels. I started with 12 kernels. Now I'm up to hundreds of pounds. And I can tell you 12 kernels in somebody's bucket on their patio doesn't feed them for weeks or even a day, but it feeds their spirit in a way that almost nothing else can. So they become part of this tradition. I'm hoping there will be people here today who will get caught up with the passion of all of this and will step up and say, I want to really, really be a part of this. Because the corn is the mother, the corn is the teacher, the corn is the blood, it's the guide, and all we have to do is listen, do the right conversation. There are books back there. There's a wonderful book called Buffalo Bird Woman, is that it? Buffalo Bird Woman. And it was a Lutheran clergyman who didn't get in the way of his own belief system to document how they took care of their garden. And it was an all-day, everyday thing. That was the life. And you didn't walk away and forget about it. You had people on platforms scaring the birds. And then you also had people keeping the teenagers out of it. It's a remarkable, remarkable book.
And the teenagers want to get on the phone.
The straight face.
There was some theft and maybe other activities. I don't know. So I felt this need to sit back up and kind of, say, this is what this is about. Is I see our consciousness as having forgotten how to recognize the spirit in all that surrounds us. And corn, more than any other plant, has for me been, the reminder from age 6 And it kept calling and calling and calling, and I kept growing corn, but I never really got the message until much more recently. So here we are. And the corn that we were looking at was not in a bushel basket at the hardware store where everybody could get it. It was in like inevitably, it's in a shoebox in somebody's closet or in somebody's basement. That's how thin the thread has been. Somebody gets gifted that thread, and I think typically that it's the person that was really responsible. But what if we looked at it that it was the corn that was responsible, refusing to give up its role in finding one person, one volunteer to carry it on. So I'm asking you all to think of yourselves as volunteers that can be part of this incredible history and future and present. The corn does not want to give up. The corn understands that it is essential to our well-being on this planet. We can't do without it.